This earth never ceases to amaze me. There are so many amazing paranormal mysteries out there that are just so bizarre, and a lot of these mysteries are downright terrifying. The stories that I'm about to share with you today about parallel universes and accidental interdimensional travel do seem to be credible, as these people are 100% convinced that they experienced this strange phenomena firsthand. The Marco Huasa Stone Forest in Peru is located in the Andes Mountains. The locals believe that this stone forest is very sacred, and they warn adventurers not to go into the sacred place, as sometimes they never come back. Now, there are tons of stories and legends about this mythical stone forest, and some believe very strongly that it possesses an interdimensional doorway. Dr. Centeno came face to face with a patient that claims to have encountered this doorway. A woman told him that she and her friends went camping in the Marco Huasa Stone Forest. Despite all the warnings, she told him that they decided to go out and do a little exploring one night. And upon their nighttime adventure, they stumbled upon a very odd-looking cabin. They watched from afar, and the woman told Dr. Centeno that this cabin just didn't belong there. The cabin was filled with people dancing, and these people were wearing very odd clothing, and they were acting very strange. Then the woman started to get pulled by an unknown force towards the cabin. Her friends had to use all their strength to pull her back. After this very strange encounter, the woman couldn't move her body and was later diagnosed with hemiplegia, a disorder that results in the complete loss of motor function. And she only has this rare disorder on one side of her body, the same side that this unknown force was pulling her by. This woman is more thankful than sad, as she believes that if it wasn't for her friends pulling her back, that she would have been lost forever. She believes that this unknown force was pulling her into another dimension. A man in Spain named Pedro Ramirez was doing his bi-weekly drive back to his hometown. Pedro is no stranger to this route, as he has done it hundreds of times before. Pedro was not prepared for what was about to happen to him. As Pedro was driving, he noticed that the road started to become alien to him. He couldn't recognize the terrain. Everything just looked weird and out of place. Pedro knew he didn't make any wrong turns, so he started to question his memory and even his sanity. This strange road led Pedro to a 6-lane highway. Upon entering this highway, he started to hear very odd voices that seemed to come from all around him. One of these voices told him that he had just been teleported into another dimension. Even though Pedro was scared out of his mind, he still noticed everything was more organized, and all the cars seemed to be outdated. Pedro got off the freeway as fast as he could. When he got off the freeway, he realized that somehow he arrived to his destination. He was back in his hometown. Pedro eventually told everybody his story, and his family and friends do believe him, as they say Pedro is not the type of person to make something like this up. Although this other place terrified Pedro, he still searches for the phantom road that led him to the 6-lane highway, hoping to finally solve this mystery that haunts him every single day. In 1972, 4 girls were driving back to the university in Utah after spending a very fun Saturday at a rodeo in Nevada. At about 10 p.m., the girls crossed the very isolated Nevada-Utah state line. As they were driving, they noticed the pavement turned to white cement. The girls started to wonder if they took a wrong turn, so they decided to head back and go the other way. A couple of minutes later, they realized that they were surrounded by green fields and pine trees. They started to get a little bit freaked out, as they knew there wasn't supposed to be green fields or pine trees in the desert. The girls got extremely happy when they saw a roadside tavern coming up. They were about to stop and ask for directions when all of a sudden, one of the girls started to scream. The girls saw 3 very odd egg-shaped looking vehicles coming towards them. These odd looking vehicles really scared the girls, so they turned around as fast as they could and floored it. While driving at top speeds, they realized that everything started to turn back to normal. There were no more pine trees or green fields, and the odd egg-shaped vehicles seemed to just vanish. The girls felt very relieved, but they were still very scared. They were not about to slow down, and they ended up crashing into a creek. Thankfully, they were all okay, but the car was done for, and they had to get out and hike. During the morning hours, an officer spotted the girls walking on the road, so we stopped to see if they were okay. The girls were still pretty shook up, and they told the officer everything. Now the officer couldn't believe what he was hearing, but despite how crazy their story was, he still wrote it all down in his report. And I'm very glad he did, or we probably would have never heard about this amazing, out-of-this-world encounter. Now I'm sure the officer didn't believe one word of the girl's story. But if you're going to make up a story in order to explain a car crash, I'm sure you wouldn't tell a story like that. And what gives this story a little bit of credibility is it's very similar to the stories within this video, making me not want to call them a bunch of liars just yet, as they might just be telling the truth. Carol was driving back to her home in San Bernardino, California, after a nice little road trip. On the way back, she had decided to stop in her hometown of Riverside, as she hasn't been there in a long time. When Carol arrived, she started to wonder if she was in the right town. She saw her old school and a few landmarks that she remembered, but all the houses were different. She couldn't find her childhood home or her friends' and family's houses. But the address numbers and the street names were the exact same. The old cemetery was there, but it was fenced off. Then she realized all the tombstones were gone. It was just a field covered with weeds. So Carol got out the map to double check, and the map confirmed that she was in the right place. Ever since Carol drove into Riverside, she felt a very sinister vibe, and there wasn't much activity going on at all. Carol couldn't explain it, but the few people she did see seemed to be evil. There was something not right about them. Carol really wanted to leave, and she never spoke of this. She came to the conclusion that her memory was just really bad, or towns can change really fast. But this experience haunted Carol, and a few years later, she went back hoping to get some answers. And this time the town was exactly the same as she remembered it. Now this did not make Carol happy at all. This scared her. She thought that maybe she was insane. Carol wanted answers, and she spent many hours researching why this happened to her. Carol is now convinced that somehow she traveled into another dimension, and she let the world know her story. In July 2008, a woman named Lorena Garcia started to experience a very rare disorder. Shortly after waking up, she realized that she was wearing different pajamas. Now she couldn't remember buying these pajamas, and she couldn't stop thinking about it. As the morning progressed, she started to notice a lot more than just her pajamas. She noticed her bed sheets, toothbrush, coffee pot, as well as tons of other minor things were different. She was freaking out, but she still decided to go to work. When she arrived at work, she realized that her department was on a totally different floor. Lorena decided to take a sick day so she can go back home and try to make sense of all this. She tried to call her boyfriend, but that number was no longer in service. Later that night, her ex-boyfriend came over and told her that they never broke up. Lorena was in shock, and her first priority was to find her boyfriend. She even hired a private investigator, but he couldn't find no trace of him or his family. Now, over the years, Lorena had come to terms with this new reality, and most professionals believe that she suffers from some sort of memory disorder. But Lorena believes without a shadow of a doubt that she woke up in a different dimension. It's the only thing that makes sense to her. And Lorena is not the only one that suffers from this rare disorder. Throughout modern times, there have been quite a few documented cases very similar to Lorena Garcia's. Now the question remains, do these people suffer from some sort of memory disorder? Or did they really wake up in another, but very similar dimension? The stories that we have been covering today, with the exception of Lorena Garcia, are from people from our dimension. But every now and then, we get a visit from someone else from another dimension, and there is no greater case than the man from Torad. In 1954, a man flew into Tokyo. When trying to get his passport stamped, he was immediately interrogated. His passport looked authentic, but it listed a country that didn't exist. This mystery man told the investigators that this was ridiculous, and when handed a map, He couldn't find his country. His hands kept hovering over France and Spain, but he couldn't see his country. The man said that he was in Japan on business, and he has been doing so for 5 years. Another very odd thing is, his passport seemed to back up his story, as it was covered with previous visa and custom stamps. He even had a driver's license that was issued by this non-existent country, and a checkbook from an unknown bank. The man was very upset, and the interrogators had never been so confused. They couldn't let him officially enter the country, so they sent him into a nearby hotel with officers guarding the door until they can get to the bottom of this. The next morning, they discovered that the man was not in his room, and there was just no way he could have escaped out of the 15-story window. This man simply vanished. The Tokyo Police Department conducted an extensive search, but the man was nowhere to be found. Whatever the truth may be, the man from Torad is the best documented evidence of parallel universes and interdimensional travel. Until next time, this is Paranormal Junkie. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned.